Hey, over here. FBI, what are you doing here? Would you like to...
So, Capcom has released yet another Resident Evil game, and let me tell you, it's better than all the previous games. Why do I say so? Well, just look at the sheer spectacle. This game feels less like a sequel and more like a haunted museum of the franchise's story, where every exhibit is alive and trying to kill you. But what makes it so special and possibly one of the best in years? I'll give you the honest truth. Let's find out together, shall we?
I think I want a second opinion.
Is this really the best Resident Evil in years, or are we just getting carried away? Alright, the hype around Resident Evil Requiem is real. Critics are calling it a masterpiece, and many reviews even position it as the best entry alongside modern heavy hitters like RE2 Remake, RE4 Remake, RE7, and Village. Capcom hasn't just made another sequel. This time, they have also made a statement, but praise doesn't always tell the full story. From my time with the game, I can actually tell you that Requiem absolutely shines in several areas. It is bold and messy like you would expect. Actually, it's mind-blowing to see the way in which survival horror blends seamlessly with explosive action of the franchise. But of course, the game isn't without its flaws. Some storylines seem heavily influenced by the already established lore. Even some boss encounters are not as spectacular as compared to the recent remakes. The game's pacing is also in question, especially in the second half when action begins to dominate the horror. So, should we still call it the best? Well, not entirely, but take it from me that the game definitely belongs in the conversation of all-time greats in the series. And don't forget the most important part, this might be the most ambitious modern entry Capcom has ever made. Story setup, Grace, Leon, and what Requiem really means for the franchise. The story setup of Resident Evil Requiem moves through the lens of two very different protagonists. One of them is the FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, who gets pulled into a bioterror investigation that turns into classic Resident Evil chaos. On the other hand, we have the battle-hurt government agent Leon S. Kennedy, whose life changed forever with the fall of Raccoon City. From being a rookie police officer to becoming a highly skilled U.S. government agent specializing in anti-bioorganic weapon operations, he has surely come a long way. Leon is both a guide and a ghost of the franchise's path. It might be Grace Ashcroft's first time discovering the horror, but Leon has been dealing with these ghosts for a long time, and their paths merge across eerie, memory-soaked spaces like the Rhodes Hill Care Center, a decaying hotel, sterile underground lab complexes, and ultimately the symbolic return to Raccoon City itself. If you see it structurally, the narrative tries to perform a delicate balancing act between these two. Grace is the welcome entry point, being the outsider, while longtime fans who have invested so much in decades of the Resident Evil survivor drama will have Leon. Even the title operates in two levels. Requiem means a farewell to honor the characters and the unresolved legacy of Raccoon City. At the same time, it's also the codename of a bioweapon that goes along with the signature action spectacle of Resident Evil. In all possibility, Requiem will be deeply nostalgic for players who have lived through Resident Evil history. Two heroes, two playstyles, one story that keeps switching gears. Resident Evil Requiem takes an interesting approach by telling one story through two main characters. The game is divided into episodes that constantly switch between their perspectives, and both the characters get almost equal time and importance in the campaign. The structure directly changes the feel of the gameplay. The episodes featuring Grace are focused on pure survival horror. She's too fragile, and her ammo and health items are also limited. This creates tension in every encounter. Her sections are slow and filled with exploration and puzzles. There's a constant fear of the unknown, but Leon's episodes are quite the opposite. Leon feels much more experienced and capable. He's equipped with stronger weapons and fast combat skills, which make his gameplay more action-packed and confident. And because the game keeps switching between these two styles, The overall pacing of the game constantly keeps shifting. You might like this design where classic survival horror is merged with modern action in such a smart way. However, sometimes players can also feel interrupted due to the sudden changes in the story's tone. For me personally, this alternating story structure was great because, it creates a rhythm of tension and release. Like how Grace builds fear and makes you feel vulnerable, while Leon is equipped enough to provide relief and momentum. So instead of feeling like two separate games, Requiem looks like a single story, which keeps the contrast between stories to keep the gaming experience fresh and engaging throughout. Grace's Campaign. Pure survival horror that keeps you on edge. Grace's Campaign is the true survival horror side of Resident Evil Requiem. Most of her gameplay is in first-person shooter mode, and this means every enemy encounter feels up close and personal. I mean, you can switch to a third person if you want, but the game wants you to feel vulnerable through Grace's point of view. As I told you, Grace is not a trained fighter like Leon. She even has limited guns and ammo. So, how does she survive? Grace often has to rely on her stealth and crafted explosive. You must know that enemies can easily overpower Grace. This means you have to plan her routes carefully and manage resources efficiently. This means taking the decision when to fight and when to avoid fighting and taking risks. In Grace's chapter, every bullet becomes important. Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center is one of the best locations in her story. Here, the map is intentionally designed with locked doors and slowly opening shortcuts, so you can backtrack without getting confused. Stalker enemies move around this space, so if you're exploring, you're in for a tense cat and mouse experience where feeling completely safe is out of the question. Grace's sections represent the pure survival horror heart of Requiem. The enemies are smartly placed, and because of their weird mutation mechanics, each fight is highly unpredictable. Grace manages to grow into a much more capable survivor as the game progresses, but still, the fear and pressure are always there. You need to be on your toes always while playing her section. Leon's Campaign. Big action, big set pieces, and classic RE energy. So, Grace's Campaign is pure survival horror and gains momentum slowly. But let's see how Leon's Campaign holds up. It's interesting to see how his campaign is the exact opposite of Grace. For starters, Leon's sections are built around a third-person perspective with combat right from the start. And, why not? After all, he's the experienced action hero in the Resident Evil franchise. That's why the gameplay in his section is faster and more aggressive. You'll see strong gunplay and melee finishers like roundhouse kicks, and not to forget Leon's crowd control tactics that allow him to handle large enemy groups with greater confidence. And, well, that's not all. His campaign also gives you big cinematic moments with spectacular motorcycle chases and massive boss fights. No doubt that Leon is powerful, but the danger never fully disappears. But apart from the thrill, there's also quite a bit of nostalgia in his storyline. If you remember Resident Evil 4, the gameplay in Leon's sections will feel like classic Leon moments. Actually, Requiem plays it quite smartly. It doesn't change the whole formula from the earlier game. It only refines the formula by adding a better combat flow and smarter environmental threats, which feels like rewarding creative aggression. Actually, I must admit that it was a huge relief to play Leon's section after the stressful chapters in Grace's campaign. The way in which both the campaigns pan out, I must say Requiem manages to create a delicate balance between fear and excitement throughout. Blood, crafting, mutations, and brutal gore, the systems that define Requiem. You can expect Resident Evil Requiem to go beyond simple shooting. One of the most unique features in the game is the blood-based crafting mechanic. Players had to collect blood from enemies or containers and use it to craft useful items. How interesting. So, combat is not only for survival now, but it's also about creating a new resource. The same goes for enemy mutations. Zombies can suddenly change their shape and form even mid-encounter. You need to be very quick to adapt in the game. You'll be distracted by the singing zombies with their haunting sounds, and Also, by multiple stalker variants who pursue players relentlessly, especially in Grace's chapter. Even the gore system is very detailed. Visible body damage, like blowing off limbs and shattering of jaws, makes each fight feel extremely brutal. You'll understand why Requiem is one of the most violent and visceral entries in the series. The gore-filled atmosphere of the locations also adds to the horror. Locations like Rhodes Hill and Raccoon City are designed to be interconnected labyrinths. These layouts will make you want to explore, but also keep up the tension. The overall presentation and the ruined atmosphere fit the disaster setting completely. But this atmosphere can't be possible without audio design, right? The game's sound helps a lot in creating and maintaining that unsettling ambient. It will be all quiet and horror, and just the next second, the music shifts to explosive action. The visuals and sound of the game will keep you hooked up in its own special way. All these elements, from blood-based crafting to sudden zombie mutations and the gripping sound, make a very strong case for Requiem to stand tall among the strongest previous entries in the series, like Resident Evil 2 Remake and Village. Puzzles, exploration, difficulty, and runtime. Does it deliver the full package? One of the core pillars of the Requiem experience are the puzzles. Elaborate scavenger hunts involve gems and detonator parts, along with environmental clues. But that doesn't mean that the traditional emblem and key-based locks don't exist. Some puzzles are quite absurd, like classic Resident Evil, but they never disrupt the pacing of the game. The campaign length averages around 10 to 12 hours, but detailed exploration and higher difficulties can surely extend the playtime. Resource availability and enemy aggression all depend upon the difficulty settings, which allows the players to tailor attention levels. However, the lack of substantial side modes, and especially a robust mercenary style mode, is a bit disheartening. Where it stumbles: story gaps, underwhelming bosses, and missing modes. So, what's more disheartening in the game? Despite the strong praise, Requiem isn't flawless. The game is quite strong overall, but the flaws are, well, it's still there. One of the biggest concerns is the story itself. According to some critics, the narrative relies too heavily on the deep series lore. This makes the emotional moments less effective for players who are not fully invested in the events of the past. The pacing of the story is also seen as uneven because certain character arcs lack the emotional payoff the game seems to build toward. Another point of concern is the boss battles. While they're visually impressive, they don't match that creativity and memorable design which was seen in other recent remakes. So much so that some encounters really feel overscripted. Even the environmental design is receiving only mixed feedback. Locations like Rhodes Hill are quite good, but there are a few areas that are not so visually striking or just plain straightforward in its layout. Exploring these areas doesn't seem quite fruitful, and the way the game leans towards heavy action in the second half seems to weaken the horror atmosphere. If the enemies are repeated and the atmosphere is always combat heavy, then the tension is slightly diluted. Personally, these issues feel quite noticeable, but not very damaging. The story and the bosses may fall short of expectations, but the core gameplay and atmosphere remain strong enough to carry the experience. Final verdict: is this actually one of the best Resident Evil in years? So now we come to the biggest question. Is Resident Evil Requiem one of the best Resident Evil in years? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. Resident Evil Requiem arrived with big expectations, and it has delivered completely. This game was destined to be one of the best because it's a culmination of what Capcom has been refining for years. For me, Requiem is a celebration of Resident Evil's legacy. The nostalgia that it creates is fantastic, and that's why my verdict is simple. Requiem is brilliant in ambition, and even more impressive in its execution. And going by those standards, it is definitely one of the best Resident Evil in years.